Tell me if this has happened to you before. A friend thinks you should watch this scary video they found on YouTube. Why did they recommend it to you? Well, in their own words, the ending's pretty good. SKYPEMARE is an excellent example of poor acting and writing seemingly being redeemed by its ending. This begs the question, can an ending truly redeem a horror short? I suppose it's as best a time as any for me to teach a lesson on endings. The first thing we need to understand is the context for which we watch a horror short. One context is the one in which we're watching a short for the first time, and one where we're re-watching a horror short. Each context is defined by our experience while watching a horror short. If we haven't watched it before, we are receiving new information and can't predict how the short will turn out. If we have already watched it, we are anticipating each next key event of the short and use the outcome of the short to re-evaluate what comes before it. For example, in the horror short Bedtime by Jonathan Castillo, on our first viewing, we are off-putted by the sudden monotonous performance of the little girl on the bed, and we speculate on the monster that is underneath her bed. If we've already watched this short, we know the girl on the bed is in fact the monster and the real girl is underneath the bed. We now understand that the girl's performance isn't poorly done but simply accurate to the short's true intentions. The significance of the mother kicking the ball under the bed is recontextualized when something kicks it back at the end. I could also spend an entire lesson just talking about the execution of this scene. It's dark, and all we can see are toys. It's silent. Silence is good. The movement of a teddy bear shocks us, and we find something we don't expect. A girl. There's a monster on the bed. The next shot shows the mother, but the camera is underneath the bed. We can't see what's on the bed. We can't save her. This is really good filmmaking. Bedtime is an example of how context shapes our viewing experience of a short horror film, as well as how a short's ending greatly impacts said context. Each context is equally accurate. These two different experiences of watching a horror short is no less valid than the other. When making a horror short, you should be taking both of these experiences into account. You want your audience to still enjoy the short even if they already know the ending, but you also don't want to spend the entire short setting up an ending we don't know yet. SKYPEMARE by John Fitzpatrick, uploaded in 2014, is a horror short whose significance is completely defined by its ending. Without it, it would not have over 2 million views. If you have seen this short before, excellent, you're caught up. If you haven't, don't worry, I'll walk you through it. What better place to start a lesson on endings than the ending? Jenna has been murdered. Her friend Allison has called the police. The murderer has found Jenna's phone and Allison's address through the contact list. In a panic, Allison grabs a kitchen knife, runs to the door, slips, and the knife she's holding impales her abdomen. Jenna reveals it was simply a Halloween prank, unable to see Allison, who is dying on the floor. As far as endings go, it's pretty good. This cheesy irony that defies the audience's expectations is unique and impactful. It's a perfect mix of tragedy and slapstick. How does the rest of the short hold up? It doesn't. The short begins with a conversation between Allison and Jenna over Skype. Eventually, I will have a lesson talking about appropriate dialogue in short horror films. Until then, I'll give you this advice. If your dialogue can be easily found in a romantic comedy film, you're going to need to do some rewriting. The purpose of dialogue in anything is to reveal information. Some of it is important to the story, some of it isn't. In the context of watching SKYPEMARE for the first time, we can't tell what information given in this scene is important and what isn't. In the context of having already watched it, we can better understand what information can be kept and what doesn't need to be there. Here is what we find out in this conversation. It's Halloween. Allison's boyfriend broke up with her. Allison's favorite holiday is Halloween. Allison is alone. Jenna has a boyfriend named Steve. Steve is out. A lunatic has broken out of an asylum. Jenna met someone at a bar. Jenna did not take the guy home. Out of the 9 pieces of information, only 4 of them are important to the story. Because we're watching it for the first time, we accept all information given as important, but if we know the outcome of the story, the dialogue spent revealing the information relevant to the story is fulfilling, while the dialogue spent revealing the information irrelevant to the story is a drag to get through. Allison notices someone walking behind Jenna. Jenna investigates, and we get music in place of silence. Music in horror works well to build atmosphere. It's not very good at actually scaring you. For example, in comedies, you're never going to think that the music made the scene funnier, much in the same way with a horror film, music can't make a scene scarier. An issue that arises from the premise is that the protagonist isn't in any danger. The idea of viewing a home intrusion from the perspective of the camera of computer is interesting. Unfortunately, most of the short is spent on Allison's reactions, and the intruder immediately finds the computer and disconnects the call anyway. This is even worse when considering the context of watching this a second time. Knowing that what Allison is viewing is merely a prank completely removes all tension. There are no stakes. What we're watching leaves no impact on us. It's sort of like finding out your favorite TV show all took place in a dream. The ending seems to devalue everything that came before it. Allison unsuccessfully makes a 911 call. On the second try, she succeeds and gives an address. The emergency response immediately hangs up. Most response units will stay on the line in case there are any updates. She calls him a third time, it's not clear why. She begins the call like this.
911, what's your emergency?
Please, she's gonna die. Please, please.
I understand that Allison is in shock, but most people understand that when calling 911, you have to be as straightforward as possible. Pictures come in of Jenna's dismembered fingers and an arm. In the context of watching it for the first time, it's gruesome, but having something like this makes it feel like the protagonist no longer has a chance of saving her friend. As important as it is to have stakes, it's also important to give your characters a chance of survival.
Police and medical are dispatched. Now we need some information.
The response unit says they need information, but never actually ask any questions. This is because the focus of the scene is on Allison watching a video sent by Jenna. We discover that she is dead, and we arrive where we began, the ending. Now Allison is finally in apparent danger, adding stakes that have ultimately been lacking in this short, and we get the punchline. It's funny, the ending seems to work better out of context than in. What's important to understand about an ending is that it's a culmination of what comes before it. It's not a scene so much as it is a moment of catharsis. This is where the ending suffers. Nothing has built up to an ending like this. You can stick this ending onto just about any short, it wouldn't make a difference. On a side note, Allison was sent a video, but the revelation that this was a prank is framed in a way that this was a live call.
Why'd you blink?
Why not just stop recording if you didn't want to stuff up? Also, emergency services find no signs of disturbances and retreats.
I'm sorry, ma'am. Ma'am, there's no disturbance at that address you have. Everything appears fine. Are you sure you gave the right address?
If there aren't any signs, that likely means that the person is either subdued or worse, dead. You should not be retreating. In the context of watching this short for the first time, you're probably going to be off-put by how it looks and sounds like a high-budget porno. You're also going to not feel as involved in the action since the perspective is on someone who has little to do with said action. In the context of having already watched it, everything in this film feels inconsequential. In the end, nothing is important because the final actions of the protagonist are independent from the rest of the short. Having the context be that she was cutting some vegetables and she was running to turn on some music does little to change the ending of the story. I have a theory that John Fitzpatrick came up with the ending first and worked his way backwards, simply because the ending is about the only creative thing you'll find in this short. In a lot of horror shorts, you might notice the endings aren't very creative. This is simply because they don't have to be. The creativity comes from the journey to the ending instead. Endings are quite momentary that way. When you watch a horror short, you're watching the final moments of someone's life, granted a fictional life, but still a life. How someone died isn't as important as why someone died. It's what I've been saying this whole time. Context is the key to everything. It's the secret ingredient to making that perfect horror short. It's not something a lot of people think about. So SKYPEMARE is an obvious example of an ending that doesn't redeem a story, but are there examples of some that do? Well, let's look at Bedtime again. In the context of watching the short for the first time, it's pretty boring. It's just a conversation between a girl and her mother. Once you understand that a monster is about to take over the girl's life and kill her mother, every little line is recontextualized to have very sinister connotations.
Of course not. There's no such thing as monsters. Don't be a baby.
Because you won't let the monsters get me, will you, Simon?
And can we stay in bed tonight? I don't want a repeat of last night.
This is in stark contrast to the scene I brought up earlier in SKYPEMARE. The Skype conversation between Allison and Jenna recontextualized. It's still two friends gossiping about their love lives, except one of them has been slightly deceitful. Technically, the only lie Jenna makes is that Steve is out, a line that plays a very small part in the actual conversation. A twist ending to a short horror film is a lot like a trap. You have to set it up, trick your audience, and then execute it. The best part of a twist ending is the setup. People remember Bruce Willis turning out to be a ghost in The Sixth Sense, not because of the execution at the end, but how little bits of information slowly tease the idea that Haley Joel Osment is the only one interacting with the character. An ending is the cherry on top of a cake. If the cake is awful, I can't imagine anyone appreciating the cherry. When you start with a cherry and decide to make a cake out of it, you might be missing something important. Ingredients. Anyway, that's enough metaphors for one day. Class dismissed.